So, the way I like to do these kinds of events and whatnot is, I don't want it to just feel like I'm sitting here lecturing you the whole time. So if you have any questions or if you have comments or if you have like a story to share, just feel free to jump in. Maybe just drop me a note in the chat so I see it. But yeah, feel free to jump in at any time. If you have questions, you need me to return to something, clarify something. It's not like a formal, you got to sit here and just listen to me talk for 45 minutes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get this set up. All right, can I just get a quick thumbs up that everyone can see my screen? I guess a verbal. Okay, perfect. Yes. All right, awesome. So, hey everyone, I'm Vinay. I'm one of the co-founders of CollegeVine, which is an online platform that has a bunch of free tools to help you through the college admissions process. It has a bunch of ways for you to network with colleges and get connected with universities as you're going through your college search. And it also has a bunch of advising resources and folks and content and so on that you can use as you're navigating the college admissions process. So today I'll be talking to all of you about perfecting your college scholarship search and really thinking about how do you reduce the cost of attending a university, which is obviously super, super expensive these days. So I want to get started with a quick agenda of what we'll be covering today. So I want to start by just doing an overview of scholarships and how they work and kind of what the timeline looks like. Then we'll get into the really two main types of scholarships that are out there, scholarships that you get directly from colleges, and then scholarships that you get from private organizations and funders. And then we'll leave some time for Q&A as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into an overview of scholarships. So the first thing I want to do before I actually get into specifically talking about scholarships is to actually take a step up a level and share some context for how you should think about the goal of saving money on college tuition, right? So there's actually multiple different ways that you can reduce the cost of attending college. And depending on who you are, your sort of application and stuff like your grades and your resume and your family's financial circumstances, one or more of these strategies could make sense for you. In fact, I would say that many students that we've worked with actually end up using a lot of these different tools and kind of stitching them together. In today's presentation, we're going to really be focusing specifically on scholarships, but I do encourage you to do research and explore these other options as well when it comes to saving money on college, right? So obviously we've got private and college funded scholarships. We'll be doing a deep dive into that tonight, but beyond scholarships, there's also financial aid, which is given out to you either by the federal government, sometimes by a state government, or by the university. And it's given to you depending on your family's financial circumstances, right? So based on how much money your parents earn, how much money they have saved, whether that's for college or for something else, you could qualify potentially for a substantial amount of financial aid, right? Which is in addition to or separate from your scholarships. Beyond that, there are also special programs that you can take advantage of, right? So obviously, I'm sure many of you know that, if you attend a public college in your home state, you actually pay a lower tuition rate. So it's usually called in-state tuition, okay? So that's something that's pretty well known. But what I'm sure many of you don't know is that there are special programs called tuition reciprocity programs, where depending on the state, depending on your home state and where you live and where your residence is, you can actually qualify for in-state tuition in other states, right? So in New England, for example, if you are a resident of Massachusetts, there are universities where you can qualify for in-state tuition in Vermont or Rhode Island or New Hampshire or Maine. Similarly, if you live in Pennsylvania or New York, you can often qualify for in-state tuition at certain institutions in those other states. So there are other kinds of programs like tuition reciprocity that you'll want to do your research into because they could really help you save a lot of money on your college tuition. And then finally, the last point is one that a lot of folks don't know about, but it's one that we've seen students have a ton of success with, and that is negotiating a better scholarship package or financial aid package with universities, right? Most, I guess, families don't know this, but so when you apply to colleges, right, you'll get an admission letter, or you'll get, I guess, rejected or waitlisted, but if you get accepted, you'll get an acceptance letter. And then if you applied for financial aid or scholarships, you'll also typically get what's called an aid award. And it'll say, this is how much our tuition costs, this is how much money we're giving you in the different types of aid, and then this is how much you'll actually have to pay out of pocket each year. So if you apply to multiple colleges and get accepted by multiple colleges, and multiple colleges give you an offer for financial aid or for scholarships, you can actually use those offers to negotiate with the other colleges that you applied to. You can actually sort of play the different colleges against each other to ask them for more money. So this is a technique that a lot of folks don't recognize, but it is something that often works really, really well. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into scholarships, because that's really the main topic of tonight's presentation. So there are two types of scholarships that you want to be aware of, right? So the first is college-funded scholarships. These are usually given out by specific institutions, right? So you apply to, say, Rutgers or St. Bonaventure College or St. Joseph's or any college, and then that college gives you a merit scholarship that is tied to that institution, right? So you have that scholarship so long as you're enrolled at that institution. These scholarships that are funded by colleges actually tend to be much larger on average than private scholarships. And you can negotiate with these colleges, like we just talked about, to increase the value if you have other offers that you can leverage. Private scholarships are given out by private organizations, and that's everyone ranging from sort of local institutions in your community, like churches and stuff like the Rotary Club, all the way up to big corporations. And these can actually be used at any college that you attend, right? So you get the money regardless of which college you end up attending. So they are a little bit more flexible. But private scholarships tend to be for smaller dollar amounts, and obviously they can't be negotiated since the organization is deciding whether or not to give you a lump sum of cash. So when it comes to thinking about scholarships, I would say that kind of the biggest misconception that a lot of folks come into the process with is that maximizing your scholarships is all about finding those private scholarships, whether that's the Nordstrom scholarship or the Coca-Cola scholars or whatever, that are going to give you that big ticket full ride scholarship. And those scholarships are certainly great. And if you are, if you have the kind of application and the kind of profile and the kind of relationships and recommenders that can help you win one of those, that's absolutely great. And I strongly encourage you to pursue those. But for most students, I would say that the best way to get scholarship money is by applying to lots of colleges, right? And the reason for that is twofold, right? The first is that in most of these colleges, right, they're actually giving out way more money than in private scholarships, right? Just for context, there's about $10 billion per year in private scholarship money that's awarded. While in a given year, colleges are actually going to give out more than $200 billion worth of merit scholarships, right? Now, there are definitely circumstances where a private scholarship is still worth applying to, but usually if you want to have more scholarship options, or if you want to find a college that is going to be pretty affordable, expanding your college list and submitting more college applications is usually a more fruitful way of getting scholarship money. And keep in mind that colleges also give out a lot of what we talked about earlier, need-based financial aid, which is generally going to be given out to your family if you have less than $200,000 in household income and less than $1 million in liquid assets. So what does the timeline look like for thinking about scholarships, right? So most of the actual work that you'll be doing is going to happen in your senior year. Now, obviously, before your senior year of high school, you're going to be doing a lot of work to make sure you're getting good grades, making sure you're challenging yourself in terms of the classes that you take, making sure that you're building your resume and participating in things outside the classroom, and making sure that you are taking standardized tests and scoring well on them if you choose to take them. But when it comes to the actual mechanics of applying for scholarships, most of that is going to be happening in your senior year. And specifically, if you look at the senior year, there's really two pieces of it. There's what I would call the applying to college portion of your senior year, and then there's the financial portion of your senior year, right? So between June and January, that's really all about applying to colleges. And to the point we just made a second ago, that's going to be where you can actually really get access to more money. But between June and July, that's kind of when you're obviously building your college list. That's like the summer before your senior year. Between August and January, you're really working on college applications, college essays, interviews, just literally filling out the Common App and literally submitting the applications. In the early part of the year, that's where things really shift. So between January and March, that's really where you're going to be applying for financial aid. That's where you're going to be applying for scholarships. Most scholarships have a deadline that's somewhere in either January, February, or March. And in some ways, that's actually pretty useful because it means that you can work on your college applications and focus on those during your the first half of your senior year, and then shift over to focus on scholarships in the second half of your senior year. And then in April and May, that's going to be when you start to think about, do I want to negotiate? Do I have multiple colleges who've come to me with some sort of offer, and actually go ahead and pick a college? So that's a bit of an overview of scholarships. I'm going to pause really quickly to take a drink of coffee and also answer any questions if have them in the chat. I know we had a couple of folks jump in a little bit after we started. So if you have any questions, if you just want to introduce yourself, definitely drop something into the chat. If not, we'll go ahead and move on to talk about maximizing the scholarships that you receive from colleges. All right, well, I don't see any questions in the chat right now. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about maximizing your college scholarships. So what types of scholarships do colleges give out? There's really three major types, and each of them has some pretty unique characteristics. So the first type of scholarship that universities give out are scholarship programs. These are usually named and sometimes even funded by famous or influential alumni of the university, or sometimes famous professors. And these tend to be pretty prestigious, pretty competitive, and tend to be for a lot of money, right? Oftentimes these are full tuition or half tuition scholarships. Then you have what we call discretionary scholarships. This is a variable amount that you'll get depending on the circumstances of your application, the other folks who are applying to that college, and how strong your application is. And these are actually controlled by an admissions office typically. And then finally, you have automatic scholarships. So these are also, part of the funding from the admissions office, but these scholarships are actually given to you automatically based on your academics, usually. So we'll talk a little bit more about each of these scholarship options. All right, so the first thing to know about merit scholarships from colleges is that not all colleges are created equal in terms of how much money they give out. Right. So there are some colleges that are very stingy with the amount of scholarships that they give out. And there are some colleges that are much more generous. And so you can use the following rules of thumb to get a sense for which colleges you might want to apply to if you're looking for lots of help paying for college. As a general rule of thumb, private colleges with high acceptance rates, which means that they accept a lot of students that apply, give out the most scholarship money, right? And the reason for this is that merit scholarships are primarily a recruitment tool for universities, right? Universities use merit scholarships, so, and they offer you a scholarship in hopes that you will choose them over another college that you have as an option, right? Now, as part of this, private colleges give out way more scholarship money than public colleges. There are often many private colleges where as much as 70% of the student body has received some sort of merit scholarship, right? So this is pretty useful to sort of keep in mind when you're thinking about building your college list. While public colleges have lower tuition rates, they are usually not very generous when it comes to giving out scholarship money. So if you find a generous private college, that can actually bring your total cost of attendance down lower while attending a private college than your in-state public options. Colleges with higher acceptance rates and lower yield rates, so yield rate is just the proportion of students who are accepted who choose to actually enroll in that university. So colleges with higher acceptance rates and lower yield rates also tend to give out more money. And this makes sense, right? Because if you think back to the idea that, that merit scholarships are a recruitment tool for universities, right? in general, if you have a low acceptance rate, right, that means that, if you have a high acceptance rate, that means that you're trying to attract lots and lots of students. And if you have a low yield rate, that means that you need some help recruiting students, or you need to do more to entice a student to choose you. So from that perspective, in general, you're going to get more merit scholarship money from colleges that have higher acceptance rates and lower yield rates. So let's dig into each of those three types of scholarships that we talked about. The first type of scholarship is scholarship programs, and there are numerous examples. Pretty much most universities have at least one of these. So you've got like the Jefferson Scholars at the University of Virginia, or the Weissman Scholars at Babson College in Massachusetts. There's tons and tons of these. Okay. And scholarship programs tend to be for these very large dollar amounts. Usually you're looking at more than $10,000 per year. But the flip side of that is that they often have a competitive process with a separate additional application you have to fill out, plus an interview, plus sometimes more hoops to jump through. Like the Jefferson Scholars Program requires you to have a nomination process from your high school teachers and school counselors. So scholarship programs tend to offer a lot of money, but they also tend to be a very involved process and competitive process. And there's no guarantee that you'll be offered that scholarship. Discretionary scholarships is really the bread and butter. This is where the vast majority of that merit scholarship money that we talked about sits. So these are controlled by the admissions office. And the way that they determine these is they'll sit down, they'll read your application, decide whether they're going to accept you. And then they will also determine how much merit scholarship money they want to offer you, if any. It's completely up to them. So, they could see two applications that are very, very similar background, similar to school district, similar, intended major, and just give completely different amounts of money, right? Depending on their own personal determinations, oftentimes driven by things like your essays. Now, one thing that's important to note is that highly selective colleges like the Ivy League schools, MIT, Stanford, the University of Chicago, schools like that, these sort of very highly ranked schools that are very competitive, for the most part, actually don't give out merit scholarship money. They do give out financial aid, and sometimes they have very generous financial aid policies, but they don't usually actually give out merit scholarship money. And these discretionary scholarships, right, are really based on the strength of your application. How strong is the application that you are submitting to the university? Now, how do you actually go about maximizing these discretionary scholarships? So the good rule of thumb for you all to use is that you're going to get the most money from a college when you are overqualified for their college. And these are oftentimes what you might call your safety schools, right? The schools where you have a really pretty much guaranteed chance of getting in, right? So discretionary scholarships are based on the strength of your application. How strong are your grades, your test scores, your resume, etc., right? And as a general rule of thumb, you'll get more money when your application is stronger than that of the typical applicant, right? So if you have much higher grades than the typical student who's applying to that particular college, you've got higher test scores, or you've got a really well-developed resume with lots and lots of participation and leadership outside of the classroom, those are often going to be triggers for you getting more money from a university. Now, one thing that's important to note here is that oftentimes, even if a college is test optional for the admissions process, right, so they'll allow you to apply with or without a standardized test score, they may not be for scholarship. There's a lot of colleges that actually still require you to submit a standardized test score to be eligible for certain scholarships. The last type of scholarship that's worth knowing about is automatic scholarships. So this is another thing that not a lot of families are aware of, but there are a lot of colleges where based on your grades and sometimes your test scores, you can actually automatically qualify for a scholarship if you are admitted to the university and you choose to enroll there. Now, I've just laid out one example on this page, but I will also put a link into the chat to a page on College Vine's blog where you can actually see a list of a bunch of different colleges that offer these types of automatic scholarships. But just as an example, Florida Gulf Coast University will give you $15,000 per year if you apply from out of state with a 3.9 GPA and a 1320 or higher SAT score, and $10,000 per year if you apply from out of state with a 3.5 and a 1220 GPA. So I'm also going to put a link in the chat to a blog post that shares more information about colleges with automatic scholarship. There's a bunch of them around the country. So if you're looking at applying to a college, you should do some research and see if they have any automatic scholarships that they offer. So that was college scholarships. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about maximizing private scholarships. Now, if you were here for the start of my presentation, you'll know that my general advice is to really focus on maximizing the amount of money you get from colleges because they tend to be more reliable about giving you scholarships. That being said, there are lots and lots of different types of private scholarships. And in certain circumstances, or if you've sort of got a lot of free time on your hands in the second semester of your senior year, or even if you just have really strong financial needs and you can't rely just on colleges, it can still absolutely be worth it to look for private scholarships. So there's a few different types of private scholarships, and each of them has their own sort of unique quirks and features, right? So the first type of private scholarships are sweepstakes, right? These are basically you just entering a drawing, right? You share your name, your contact information, maybe answer a couple of questions, but then your name is just drawn straight out of the hat. So there's no judging process, right? And it's no different than like entering into a contest online, right? So sometimes these are called scholarships, but they're really just sweepstakes. They're really just your sort of name being drawn out of a hat, 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of 10,000, 1 out of 100,000. You have no idea how many people are applying, quote unquote, applying for the same scholarship as you in these cases. The next type of scholarship is what I like to call large competitive awards, right? So these are things like we talked about earlier, the Coca-Cola scholars or the Bloomingdale scholars, or there's a bunch of other ones, right? These tend to be for substantial dollar amounts, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, sometimes even full tuition on an annual basis, right? But they also tend to be super competitive. There's lots and lots of students that apply. Maybe only 15 or 20 or 30 of them from around the country will get selected. So they're very competitive, but they're also very valuable. Then you have what I call interest or major-based scholarships, right? So these are usually based on your academic interests or sometimes your hobbies. They tend to be for mid-sized dollar amounts. Oftentimes they're $2,500 or $5,000, maybe sometimes as high as $10,000, and they're really tied to the major or academic field that you are pursuing, right? So there's scholarships for engineering, for nursing, for business, marketing, drama. There's pretty much for every field. There's at least a few scholarships that are tied to your specific major. Now, a lot of times these are open to you once you are enrolled in college and have elected to or chosen a major. But there are many of these that are also available to you as you are an incoming freshman. So it's, again, really worth doing your research. Now, in terms of in terms of scholarships, the last type to be aware of is community scholarships, right? So community scholarships are given out by local institutions within your community. In your case, it would be Levittown. So I don't know what the specifics are for which types of institutions in your hometown offer scholarships, but oftentimes a church or a temple or a synagogue or some sort of religious institution offers a scholarship. If you have like a Rotary Club or a VFA club, or sorry, a Rotary Club or a VFA organization or someone like that, some sort of community organizations, those often offer money. Sometimes the mayor's office or the school board will offer scholarships. So again, you'll have to do your own research, maybe ask your teachers and ask your counselors, but there are community scholarships as well that are specific to your local community for students who are graduating from high school in your town. Now, my general sort of rule of thumb is that on this page, the two most useful types of scholarships for students are either large competitive awards, if you've got the kind of application and profile and grades that will make you competitive for that. Those can be a good use of time, and community scholarships can often be a good use of time. Interest or major-based scholarships are too often limited to students who are already in college, so they're not going to be as useful for you before you enroll in universities. And sweepstakes are low probability of success, and they also tend to be smaller dollar rewards. So, if it's quick to enter and it doesn't cost you too much, there's no harm in sort of choosing sweepstakes, but I definitely wouldn't rely on those as a source of funding. If you win, great, but if not, I wouldn't be counting on them. So let's talk about each of these types of scholarships, private scholarships, in a little bit more detail. So with sweepstakes, these are offered by all kinds of all kinds of different institutions, and a lot of times what these boil down to is some brief information that you're entering, and then you basically share some information with the sort of organization or the company that is sharing this that is offering this sweepstakes, and you get entered into a scholarship drawing, right? So it's a $5,000 scholarship drawing from the Christian Connector, or $2,000 worth of scholarship drawing from Campus Real in this case, right? And again, they tend to be super basic, super quick to apply for, but your chances of winning tend to be pretty low. Next up, we have competitive scholarships, right? So there are lots and lots of different organizations that offer competitive scholarships, right? But they tend to be a limited number of awards that are really oriented towards students who have super strong applications and profiles. So in this case, we're looking at one of those awards, and you can see that this organization in particular offers, $50,000, $25,000, and $10,000 scholarships, but to gifted and high achieving students who have completed a significant piece of work, right? So there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, but these can be worth it if you've got the right set of credentials. Beyond that, there are also competitions that you can enter where there's lots of prize money that turn into scholarships. So for example, the American Legion has a National High School Oratorical Contest Scholarship, where you participate in an oratorical or speaking contest. And if you make it to the national finals or to the, even to the state finals and win your state competition, you're eligible for some money. There's also sort of more project-based competitions. The Paradigm Challenge, for example, has a bunch of money that it gives out for college scholarships. And this is for pursuing projects that do good within your community. Now, we talked a little bit about field-specific scholarships, and again, a lot of these are only open to you if you are already enrolled in college. But as you can see here, there are scholarships for nursing students. There are scholarships for students pursuing an environmental career. Pretty much any career or academic field that you are thinking about pursuing, there's usually a scholarship or two out there for your field. It's not 10 or 100 or dozens. Finally, let's talk a little bit about community scholarships. So community scholarships are usually given out by institutions in your community, church, Rotary Club, mayor's office, etc. They're usually small dollar amounts, less than $2,500 and oftentimes less than $1,000. And they're really given out based on academics, as well as oftentimes community service and engagement with your community more broadly. So how do you actually go about finding private scholarships? Well, there's a few resources that I would recommend. Going Merry does a really good job of not only sort of laying out a bunch of different scholarship options that you can explore, but they also have a set of tools that allow you to calculate which scholarships you might be eligible for. So I do actually strongly recommend Going Merry. FastWeb is pretty similar in terms of what they do, but their interface is maybe a little bit, they have fewer, I guess, really useful tools than Going Merry, but they still have a lot of coverage because they're maybe like the historical sort of default listing site. Same with scholarships.com. So FastWeb and scholarships.com are really good if you're just looking for a big list of scholarships. Going Merry is useful if you want something that's a little bit more tailored to your personal circumstances. Beyond these, I would also strongly recommend Googling scholarships for your town, for your major, for maybe your interests or your hobbies. Sometimes scholarships don't end up in these aggregator sites like Going Merry or FastWeb or scholarships.com. And that's something that you can often catch, especially for community scholarships that are specific to your local community, to Levittown. I would say that you want to use Google if you can. I would also ask your teachers or your guidance counselor, your school counselor, if they know of any scholarships that you'd be a good fit for. It's another area where they oftentimes have knowledge, particularly with some of those community scholarships and some of those programs that they are just tied into because they are academic faculty. Now, one final thing to note about private scholarships is that if you do end up winning some money from a private scholarship, that actually can sometimes be, I guess, counterproductive or at least neutral for your overall cost of attending a university. And the reason for this is that if you get money from a private scholarship, that's actually going to count against your financial aid. So if you are planning on applying for financial aid, right, that need-based financial aid based on your family's financial circumstances, you want to be careful about applying for private scholarships because oftentimes the colleges will use the private scholarship as an excuse to cut back on the amount of financial aid that they give you. So with that, that covers pretty much all of, I guess, the content that I had on tap for today, but I'm sure there are some questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, I will move into some Q&A.
Hi, I have a question. So if you win or if you apply and you receive a community scholarship for say $1,000 from the Rotary Club, say, you have to tell the colleges that you're applying for that you have that scholarship, and that's they adjust your financial aid accordingly for like the community scholarships as well.
Yeah. So the way that works is when you receive a scholarship, a community scholarship, that actually has to be reported as income, right? And so when you apply for financial aid, you're giving them, your financial details, you're giving them your income, your assets, etc. And so it ends up counting against you in the financial aid process.
Gotcha. So you have to report everything that you're receiving that's going towards your college bill.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I see a question from Abdullah in the chat. I'm sorry, I joined a little late, but what is CollegeVine? Yeah, absolutely happy to quickly address that. So CollegeVine, we're a free online platform for students where you can, and we have basically we have a bunch of tools that you can use to navigate the college admissions process. We've got a sort of recruiting network where you can join for free and get recruited by colleges. You can connect with admissions officers and professors and other folks at universities as well. And then we also have a ton of advising resources and advisors that participate in the platform that you can use to get help to navigate the college admissions process. Does anyone else have any other questions about scholarships? Also, you don't have to limit yourselves to just scholarships. If you have questions about financial aid more broadly, if you've got questions just about the admissions process more broadly, totally happy to answer those as well. All right, so I see a question from Rahan. Can you get a scholarship from electives like robotics? So there are definitely organizations that offer scholarships for robotics, right? Now, you wouldn't necessarily get it directly from the university for robotics, but there are definitely private organizations, oftentimes like engineering companies or robotics companies that do have scholarships that are offered for robotics. Again, I would definitely recommend you to just do a little bit of research, and you'll find some of those options. Next question is from Aryan. How exactly does going to a community college for 2 years and then going to a private college work? Yeah, so with community colleges and then transferring into private colleges, it is a little bit more complicated than it is to go from a community college to a public university, right? So with community colleges and then transferring into public universities, community colleges oftentimes have these formal agreements with public universities in the same state that are called articulation agreements. And what an articulation agreement is basically, an articulation agreement, is basically a sort of listing of all the courses that you could have taken, all the coursework that you could have pursued at the community college, and how that translates into your 4-year college credit, right? So oftentimes the two institutions have gotten together and have said, okay, we're going to give this much credit to this course taken at the community college, this much credit to this course. If a student is planning on pursuing engineering, this is what their pathway will look like once they get to our campus, so on and so forth, right? So that's often a pretty straightforward process. But if you're going from a community college to a private university or to a 4-year public university that's outside your home state, oftentimes there's not going to be that formalized articulation agreement. So it's going to make things a little bit more complicated, right? So first of all, you have the competitive admissions process, right? The articulation agreements, in addition to kind of defining how the credits will work, they oftentimes also have a sort of set of requirements where as long as you meet certain GPA and coursework requirements, you get automatically admitted into the 4-year university. When it comes to transferring outside of an articulation agreement, now you're in the competitive transfer pool with other students who are applying from other community colleges, as well as students who are applying to transfer in from other 4-year colleges. So that's the first piece, is that the admissions process becomes more complicated and more competitive. Beyond that, you'll have to, again, be very careful and do your research because, the exact same set of courses that you took at a community college can translate very differently depending on which 4-year college you're going to. Let's say, again, just for example, you're studying English, right? You're planning on pursuing an English major. Okay, you do 2 years at a community college, you could go to one university and they might say, okay, you have another 2 years worth of work and then you'll graduate with an English degree. But you could go to another 4-year college and they might say, hey, you actually have to do another 2.5 years of work to finish your English major because we're going to give you less credit for the courses that you took in the community college, and you still have to fulfill some of our other course, general education requirements. So in fact, you're going to have to come here for 3 years or even 4 years. So if you're looking to use a community college as a stepping stone, as a way of saving a little bit of money, going to a private four-year college is going to be oftentimes pretty complicated, and you're going to have to do a lot of extra work to coordinate with that university's transfer office and their community college support team. That being said, it can still be a really great deal if you can find the right private four-year college to transfer into, but it is just going to be a lot of work. Any other questions from the audience?
Yes. Good evening. I do have one question. Is it possible to find out ahead of time whether or not, if you would be eligible to receive TAP and Pell based on your income, or whether or not what scholarship that you will be eligible to get if you know what college you're going to be applying and you know that you would like to apply to? Is this something that we could do a year before, like if a child is in 11th grade?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is yes, it's possible to do all those things. Where and how you're going to do them is going to vary depending on which of those aspects you're specifically talking about. So I'll talk about the Pell Grants first, because those are, again, the government financial aid. So the general rule of thumb now is that if your household income is below $65,000 a year, that's really the zone in which you're going to be eligible for Pell Grants. Now, sometimes that goes up if you've got more kids or you've got extenuating circumstances, but that's a general rule of thumb: $65,000 to $70,000 a year of household income. If you're below that number, you're going to be often Pell eligible. If you're above that number, it starts to get a lot more dicey. Right. So that's in terms of the government financial aid. In terms of estimating the amount of financial aid you're going to get from institutions and the amount of merit scholarship money you're going to get from institutions, that is something that you can definitely estimate as an 11th grader, but there are some caveats to that estimate, right? So first and foremost, your family's financial situation might change between junior year and senior year, so that's going to obviously change that financial aid calculation. Beyond that, your student, I'm assuming you're a parent. If you're a student, I apologize, but if you are a parent, right? Okay. So your student, is going to do more things, right, in their high school career that are going to change how their application is perceived, right? Whether that's taking a standardized test score, whether that's getting better or hopefully not worse, but sometimes worse grades, or pursuing extracurricular activities and building more of a resume. So so it's not going to be a perfect guess, but you can get something that's pretty directionally accurate. So there's a couple ways of doing this. You can go college by college, and they will often have published statistics on merit scholarships, as well as like a financial aid calculator that you can fill out, a bunch of different times. And if you know which colleges you're planning on applying to, if you have a couple target colleges in mind, you can definitely do that. You can also use CollegeVine. So one of our free tools is actually what we call our universal net cost calculator. And basically what it does is you enter in your profile, you enter in all your information, your financial information, and you get an estimate for every college in the country of how much financial aid, kind of like what ranges students or families like you typically receive, and how much merit scholarship money students like you typically receive. And you enter that information once, and then you'll get it spit out for every college on their profile. So you can even use that to research other colleges and see if there's any other options out there for your child.
Okay, so is it okay to reach out to their financial aid office ahead of time? Would they be able to do that for us, or it's not something that they are geared toward that?
So they're not really geared towards that. They're really geared more towards both like making the calculations for students who've already applied, and then also they do a lot of work to deal with students who are already enrolled in the university, because your financial aid offer is actually not something that is just static, given to you once at the beginning of college, and you keep it throughout. With financial aid, you actually have to recalculate it and reapply every year. And so you might get a different amount of money sophomore, junior, senior year. So they actually do a lot of work on that as well. What I was describing with CollegeVine is actually it's literally just a software tool. Again, you go in, it takes 10 minutes to fill out all the information.
Plug it in all your information,
and then you get those estimates there. And then obviously you're gonna have to update them when it gets to next year or the year after, or whenever your child's going to college.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, where did you say to get those estimates?
So it's actually on collegevine.com. So if you go to collegevine.com, set up an account, and then, fill out the profile and fill out the financial profile. You'll get all that information, and it's all free. So there's no cost to doing any of this.
Great, thank you.
And all that information we put it on that website is going to stay confidential?
Absolutely. So you have complete control over what information is saved. You can obviously go in, get the estimates, and then delete it if you'd like to, but it's all confidential and all private and secure and everything. So
Okay.
all right, doesn't look like we have any more questions.
Sorry.
So with that, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Collegewine.com. I just kind of opened it as we were just talking. So it's a one website that links to many colleges within the state or outside of state?
Yeah, well, I mean, we basically support students who are applying to colleges all around the country, and even around the world. So yeah, so it's not tied to just one specific college or one specific state. It's pretty much nationwide, and even some some universities outside the United States.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like there are no more questions from the audience. Thank you so much for hosting me and for hearing me drone on for 45 minutes at this point. And hopefully you got something to use out of tonight's presentation.